Hey there everyone, welcome to Sources Classes. So in this video, we are going to learn about the following question that talks about the highlights of COP21. So yes, COP21 is basically the Paris Agreement, right? So what is basically Paris Agreement? So Paris Agreement is an international agreement to combat the climatic damages, the climatic changes, right? So when was it? The first time the Paris Agreement was made in 2015, right? And so what are the key factors? Let us have a look at it. So number one is basically the objective. So that is combat climate change, right? Second one is when it was done. So it is 11 December 2015, where the government of 195 nations gathered in Paris, France, and discussed a possible new global agreement on climate change aimed at, what were the aims? This is very important. So what was the aim? The global greenhouse emission, and thus reduce the threat of dangerous climatic change. So this was the main attempt and the main focus of this particular agreement, right? Apart from that, what was done? So a 32-page Paris Agreement with 29 articles, widely recognized as historic deal to stop global warming. So this was one of the major steps taken, where this agreement was totally based to stop the global warming, to stop the harmful effect of greenhouse gases. Now let us talk about the aims, right? So what are the aims of the Paris Agreement? To start with, number one is keep the global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, right? So it was the objective that you have to stop the increase in temperature from rising by at least 2 degrees Celsius. So that was the first goal. Second is pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. You have to keep it down. That is, you have to avoid increase in the temperature by 2 degree. Not only that, the second objective is to meet it, to keep it within 1.5 degree increase and not beyond that. And the third one is the strengthen the ability of countries to deal with the impact of climate change. So these were the three major objectives discussed in the Paris Agreement. Now let us discuss about few points of the difference between the Paris Agreement and Kyoto Protocol, right? So as told, Paris Agreement was 2015 and Kyoto Protocol is 1997. Right? So the Paris Agreement basically is the world's first comprehensive climatic agreement, although about this it was also discussed in the Kyoto Protocol, but developed and developing countries were parties to Kyoto Protocol, right? So developing countries were not mandated to reduce their emissions. So in the Paris Agreement, it was mandatory for all the participating nations to abide by the agreements that were being made. But in Kyoto Protocol, although it was about the pollution control and biding the pollution level and talking about environment, but the developing countries were not necessarily and were not mandated to reduce their emissions in the Kyoto Protocol. So this means that while Paris Agreement is legally binding to all the parties, Kyoto Protocol was not. So this is one of the difference, right? Now apart from that, what else? Paris Agreement was reached on the 21st session of the Conference of the Parties, that is COP. Conference of the Parties is COP, and the 11th session of the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to Kyoto Protocol, that is your CMP, right? So COP is our Paris Agreement and CMP is our Kyoto Protocol. Now next one is about the national determined contributions, right? Let us talk about the nationally determined contribution of this particular agreement. To start with, number one, we have the national pledges by countries to cut emissions are voluntary, right? So these are all the voluntary participation and voluntary agreements. Second one is about the Paris Agreement requires all parties to put forward then the best efforts through nationally determined contributions, right? So nationally determined contributions, NDC. What is the full form of NDC? It is nationally determined contributions. So this is one of the part of this agreement, and this was to strengthen the efforts in the years ahead, right? Third one is this includes requirements that all parties report regularly on their emissions and on their implementation efforts. So their progress, they has to submit a progress report of what they were doing and what were the steps taken in order to abide by the rules of the agreement, right? In 2018, parties will take stock of the collective efforts in relation to progress towards the global set in the Paris Agreement. And lastly, there will also be global stock takeaway 5 years to access the collective progress towards achieving the purpose of the agreement and to inform further individual by the parties. So this was the basic overall about the Paris Agreement. Now let us see what is India's contribution or India's intent towards this national determined contribution, right? So number one is India's INDC, that is our India's that is the intended national determined contribution. The full form of NDC is nationally determined contribution and INDC is intended nationally determined contribution, right? So what was the intention here? To reduce the emission intensity of its GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030 from 2005 level. Okay, so this was one of the determined contribution of India. Second one, India has also pledged to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree covers by 2030. So all of the agendas are looking towards the year 2030. So by 2030, these are all the plans to take forward and try to abide by it as per the India, right? And the last one is India will anchor a global solar alliance, that is your international agency for solar policy and application. What is the full form of INSP? And this point is very important, not only for the descriptive type of questions but also for the exams where you can expect MCQ questions. This is very important. That is INSPA, so International Agency for Solar Policy and Application, right? So India will anchor a global solar alliance of all countries located in between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So these were the intentions of the India. So that's all for Paris Agreement.